In this video, we will discuss the comparison of adverbs in Latin. But, very quickly, we will review something that we already know, the comparison of adjectives. I have 3 sentences to demonstrate this. Discipulus fortis gladiatorem petet, which we translate as, the brave student, Discipulus fortis, attacks a gladiator. Second sentence, Discipulus fortior quattuor gladiatores petet. We translate that as, a braver student, the Discipulus fortior, attacks 4 gladiators. And third sentence, Discipulus fortissimus centum gladiatores petet. The bravest student, the Discipulus fortissimus, attacks 100 gladiators. That's one impressive student. Okay, let's take a closer look at those 3 adjectives. First we had fortis forte, which we translate as brave. Then we have fortior fortius, which we translate as braver. And remember that fortior is the masculine and feminine form, and fortius is the neuter form. And thirdly, we had fortissimus, fortissima, fortissimum, which means the bravest. Let's remind ourselves of the terminology that we use to describe these 3 degrees of the adjective. First, fortis is the positive adjective. Fortior fortius is the comparative adjective. And fortissimus, fortissima, fortissimum is the superlative adjective. Okay, and let's remind ourselves that we have some alternate translations to take care of. The comparative adjective could be translated as braver or rather brave. And the superlative adjective could be translated as bravest or very brave. Now, let's move those over to the side and take a look at another adjective. We'll use sanus, sana, sanum, which means healthy. We can make a comparative by adding ior, ius. We have sanior, sanius. Again, sanior is the masculine and feminine form, and sanius is the neuter form. And this means healthier, or rather healthy. And for our superlative, we'll have sanissimus, sanissima, sanissimum, adding the issimus, issima, issimum endings. And we translate this as healthiest, or very healthy. Okay, now to delve into the comparison of adverbs. Again, 3 sentences to illustrate the concept. Discipulus fortiter pugnat. The student fights bravely. Okay? Second, Discipulus fortius quam gladiatores pugnat. Recognize quam as the word that means than when we're talking about comparisons. So this means the student fights more bravely than the gladiators. And third sentence, Discipulus ex omnibus hominibus fortissime pugnat. We can translate this as, the student fights the most bravely, ex omnibus hominibus, out of all the people. Okay, now notice what's going on with these 3 adverbs here. Fortiter, fortius, and fortissime. Bravely, more bravely, and most bravely. Now, you can probably guess the terminology that we give to these 3 forms of the adverb. Yes, we have the positive adverb, fortiter, comparative adverb, fortius, and superlative adverb, fortissime. And just like with the adjectives, we can add some other translations for the comparative and superlative. We can say more bravely or rather bravely for the comparative. We can say very bravely or most bravely for the superlative. Okay, here are the rules that you will want to know for forming these 3 types of adverbs. First, the positive adverb. Declensions 1 and 2 will form it in their own way. The third declension will form it a little bit differently. We'll see that in a second. So the rule for declensions 1 and 2 to form an adverb is to add the long E to the stem of the positive adjective. And so, let's take as an example the adjective lightus, lighta, lightum, which means happy. And so, we add a long E to the stem, and we have lighte, which means happily. Okay, here's the third declension. We'll take the adjective fortis, forte, and our rule for the third declension is to add iter, I-T-E-R, to the stem of the positive adjective. And so the positive adverb from fortis forte is going to be fortiter. And we translate this as bravely. Okay, that's 2 rules so far. We've got 2 more to go. For the comparative adverb, there is no difference between the first and second declension and the third declension. So our rule is going to be to use the neuter nominative singular of the comparative adjective. And so we'll take fortior fortius, the comparative adjective from brave, and remember that that neuter singular always ends in ius. So the comparative adverb is going to use that same form, fortius, which we translate as more bravely or rather bravely. Okay, and the last rule for superlative adverbs. Add e, the long e, to the stem of the superlative adjective. So, the superlative adjective from fortis is fortissimus, fortissima, fortissimum. Our stem is fortissim, and then we add the e to the end of that. So we have fortissime. We translate this as most bravely or very bravely. Now, if you think about it, this isn't a new rule at all. We already learned this rule, because superlative adjectives are first and second declension adjectives. And so the rule that we just learned for forming adverbs from first and second declension adjectives is this very thing. Add the long e to the stem of the adjective. Either way, we end up with the same form, fortissime. Okay, so let's try a couple of examples to see this out. First, we'll take that laetus, laeta, laetum, the first and second declension adjective that means happy. The positive adverb, since this is a first and second declension adjective, uses the long e rule. Our positive adverb is laete, which means happily. The comparative adverb, remember, uses the ending ius, and so we have laetius, which we translate as more happily or rather happily. And for the superlative adverb, think issimus, issima, issumum, and we'll have laetissime, most happily or very happily. Okay, here's one for you to try. Dulcus, dulca. Pause the video now and form the positive, comparative, and superlative versions of the adverb. Okay, here's what you should have. For the positive, since this is a third declension adjective, you use the iter rule. You have dulcater, sweetly. The comparative uses the ius, and you'll have dulcius, more sweetly or rather sweetly. In superlative, think issimus, issima, issimum, and you have dulcissime, most sweetly or very sweetly. One more for you to try. Celer, celeris, celera. Pause the video now and form the positive, comparative, and superlative degrees for this adjective. Okay, here's what you should have. Again, this is a third declension adjective, and so the positive adverb will use the iter rule. Celeriter, quickly. The comparative adverb, again, ius, we have celerius, which is more quickly or rather quickly. Now, for the superlative, we should stop and think for a second. Think about normally, we use issimus, issima, issimum to form the superlative degree of the adjective, but not for celer, celeris, celera, because celer is an adjective that ends in er, and it has a different rule that applies to it. We add rimus to the stem, and so our superlative adjective is celerimus, celerima, celerimum. And so this is the form that we need to use to create the superlative adverb. So our superlative adverb will be celerime, most quickly or very quickly. Okay, I have one more adjective to show you. Sapiens sapientis. This is a one-termination adjective of the third declension that means wise. Now, you might expect to form the positive adverb using the iter rule and have sapientiter. But this isn't quite right because of another rule which I'm going to share with you right now. Sapientiter is not the correct form. This is because sapiens sapientis is an adjective that has a stem that ends in nt. And whenever you have an adjective that has a stem that ends in nt, the adverb ending condenses And so, for example, from sapiens, the adjective, we have an adverb sapienter, wisely. Notice how the I drops out, and we have an ending that is a single T, E, R. Now this is a rule that applies to adjectives that have a stem that ends in NT. The comparative and the superlative will be perfectly fine. So, as you might guess, the comparative will be sapientios, more wisely, and the superlative will be sapientissime, most wisely. Okay, I have one more thing to share with you. We've been forming adverbs from adjectives so far, but we can also take an adverb that we've learned previously and perform a full comparison on them. Create a positive, comparative, and superlative degree. So we'll take, for example, saipa. The adverb that we know means often. We can use the same rules that we've seen already. The comparative will be saipios, more often, or rather often. And the superlative will be saipissime, most often or very often.